right, folks, Steve Merrill's here to break down college football's biggest games. We've arrived in postseason play. Steve, you can catch his work at wagertalk.com, not just college football, the NFL, the NBA, and, of course, college basketball. All right, Steve, we're running through these bowl games, and we've got the Big 12 and the SEC getting together at the Texas Bowl. Ole Miss is a 3.5-point favorite, despite losing their last three games, taking on Texas Tech.
Yeah, on the surface, you see Texas Tech playing the Texas Bowl against Ole Miss. You'd think there's a little bit of an edge there, but it's in Houston, Texas. I would think Ole Miss will probably travel pretty well to this December 28th game. So I'm going to basically call it neutral. I'm not going to give a home field advantage to either team, which I rarely do in the bowl games. I mean, there's a couple times we'll do that, and even then it's not a pure home field advantage because the travel situation for the opposing team is usually, stretched out several weeks. With that said, I think the big question here is, which Ole Miss team shows up. Is this an Ole Miss team that started the season 8-1, was basically a top 10 team in my power ratings at one time, or is it the team that lost three straight down the stretch and failed to cover the last two games? Now, the first loss was a hard-fought loss against Alabama, 30-24 at home. They covered as a 10-point dog. No shame in that. I do think that lingered into the Arkansas game, in which they lost by 15 on the road as a pick-em. I did think they would play better in the Egg Bowl against Mississippi State on Thanksgiving night. That also a close loss, though, 24-22. They had a 3-1 turnover edge, though, which is concerning in that game because you should win when you have a 3-1 turnover edge. By the way, the Arkansas game a 3-0 turnover deficit, which once again shows I do think that was just a flat spot after the Alabama near miss. Let's turn and look at Texas Tech here. They played extremely well down the stretch. This is a Texas Tech team that was sitting just 4-5 going into November's 12th game against Kansas. They had to win two of their last three just to be bowl eligible, and they won all three straight up and against the spread, including back-to-back underdog wins against Iowa State and Oklahoma. If you look at the database over the last 20, 30 years I've been doing this, take a team off a three-game losing streak against a team off back-to-back straight-up dog wins, the contrarian angle works more times than not in these bowl games. So that does favor Ole Miss here to bounce back. And once again, you got to handicap these bowl games differently than the regular season. You kind of throw the numbers out, you look at motivation. I think both teams will be motivated here. A little bit of a concern, the Mississippi probably had a bigger bowl game on deck when they were 8-1. But now after three losses, I think they've come back down to earth. They have a few weeks to regroup. The money does not agree, though. It opened 4. It's down to 3.5. I even see some threes out there. So keep an eye on this one. We have several weeks till it kicks off. Those that watch the channel every week know that 3 is the most key betting number in all of sports when it comes to football. There's about an 8 to 9% chance that Ole Miss wins by exactly 3 in this game. So if you do like Texas Tech, I would grab the plus 3.5 now while it's available. If you like Ole Miss, I would wait, as there are some -3s starting to show. See how this one plays out, because once again, I think the public in general will probably be backing Texas Tech after their strong finish to the regular season.
There could have been an impact on the Ole Miss football team during that slide in which there was big speculation that Lane Kiffin was taking off for another job, specifically Auburn, and he didn't put that to rest until after the Egg Bowl game that he was staying at Ole Miss. And so we've got the Rebels at 8-4 taking on Texas Tech. Catch Steve's work at wagertalk.com, and that means college basketball, the NBA, and the NFL included, and his money management system. If you go to patreon.com, search Mark Rogers TV, you get a ton of benefits there. I'll highlight two. You can talk college football all the time on the Discord with the knuckleheads, and you get Steve's Under the Radar selection, which he'll provide a few for postseason play. He went a mere 12-1-1 against the spread in his Under the Radar selections during the regular season. And again, that's patreon.com. Search Mark Rogers TV right there. Steve, thanks so much for stopping by.
Hey, thanks, Mark.
Okay, then we've got Cheez-It Bowl, Florida State, Oklahoma. I've got 7.5 and 65.
Alrighty, looks good.
Two of the major brands in college football history playing in a minor bowl game in Orlando, Florida. We got Steve Merrill on the line from wagertalk.com to help us break down all the matchups during postseason play among the Power Five. Steve, and we've got a matchup here. Florida State, they had a 3-game skid during October, and they've bounced back nicely with dominant performances, mostly capped off by a win against their arch rival, Florida. And then you've got Oklahoma limping in at 6-6. So Florida State's a 7.5-point favorite in this game.
Yeah, you always have to kind of take, Mark, a contrarian aspect when handicapping the bowl games, right? You throw the regular season results out. It's all about motivation, which team is ready to play. I mean, if this line had come out back in September, I think everybody would have been jumping on Oklahoma plus the 7.5 to +8. The line opened 8. It's come down to 7.5, but it's still over that key number of 7. There's about a 4 to 5% chance that Florida State wins this game by exactly 7 points. So, 7.5 preseason would have been extremely enticing with Oklahoma. But then you look, as you said, with the recent results, this is an Oklahoma Sooner team that was on the verge of maybe not being bowl eligible. This team was just 5-5 straight up going into their final 2 games. They got the big win against Oklahoma State, a rival win. I actually had a strong best bet on the Sooners laying the touchdown in that 28-13 win at wagertalk.com. I do think it was a little bit of a flat spot the following week when they lost outright 51-48 to Texas Tech, a high-scoring loss, which once again shows me that there probably wasn't much focus on defense. But defense has been the problem for Oklahoma this year. I think back to when they lost to Kansas State, they go down to TCU that following week. Horned Frogs put up over 50 on them. In fact, TCU had, I believe either 4 or 5 touchdowns of over 60 yards, in the first half alone. Just big play touchdowns. We'll see if Florida State is able to do that. This was a pretty good offense this year, 36 points a game, almost 7 yards per play, almost 9 yards per pass, 5.5 yards per rush. So you could see some big touchdowns breaking in this game, and I think that's one of the reasons we've seen the early money coming in the over. It opened 62. It's now up to 65 within a couple days. So I think the over makes sense here if Oklahoma can do their part offensively. This is still a team that averaged 33 points a game, over 6 yards per play. The big edge for either team in this game, though, is Florida State on defense. 19.5 points a game, 4.8 yards per play. But the long layoffs in these bowl games, sometimes teams don't come fully focused. The game is in Orlando, by the way, so probably a little bit of an edge for Florida State. Oklahoma normally travels extremely well, as you know. The question is, will they be as excited to travel to this game? It's something we'll have to start reading about. We have several weeks till this game is played. Dig between those headlines, the local papers, see how many fans are traveling, see how much of their ticket allotment is used. It's another good indicator. I think Florida State will show up in this game. It really be if their defense shows up will probably be the difference.
Yeah, from a psychological standpoint and expectations of these two programs, obviously they're two of the bigger brands in the nation, but Florida State's been down. This is going to be their biggest season if they win a 10th game since 2016. They haven't even been to a bowl game in 3 years. They went 5-7 last year, so I think they feel really good about their team. There have been a number of players that have said, despite their NFL draft status, that they're going to play in this game because they're a close unit that's weathered the storm and adversity and put together a really strong season. Oklahoma's used to going to playoffs and major bowl games, and this is the first time in quite some time that's not been the case as they limp in at 6-6. So just something to consider there. Again, it's Steve Merrill at wagertalk.com for the NFL, college football, basketball, and the NBA. Get on over to Patreon. Join us there. We've got a Discord where you can talk college football all the time. It never stops. Chat all the time, 24/7, 365 with our knuckleheads on the Discord at Mark Rogers TV on Patreon. And you get Steve's Under the Radar selection of the week. 12-1-1 against the spread. I hesitate every time I spit it out because you'd have to watch the videos to know it and believe it. But get it right there on patreon.com. Search Mark Rogers TV. All right, Steve, thank you so much as always.
Hey, thanks, Mark.
All right, I guess we'll cut to the playoffs just to make sure we get those in.
Sounds good.
Michigan, TCU. I haven't looked that one up yet. Do you have that?
7.5, 59. Yeah, it's come down a little bit.
Yeah, I thought it was 9. Okay. Michigan back in the playoffs for a second consecutive season, trying to make amends for his performance against Georgia. Big Ten champion again, taking on TCU in the national semifinal at the Fiesta Bowl. We got Steve Merrill on the line from Wager Talk. Steve's selections are phenomenal. He's 12-1-1 against the spread in his exclusive under the radar selections that he provides for us on Patreon. So join us on patreon.com at Mark Rogers TV. Steve, we've got the ones that matter. We talk incentive, motivation, letdowns, all that during bowl play. But this one, of course, is one of the two major ones. Michigan's a 7.5-point favorite against a TCU team that finally lost in the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? We keep saying, TCU is not one of the top 4 teams in college football. And by the way, they still are not one of the top 4 teams. I have no problem with them being in. And by the way, I'll give you props, Mark. We talked about this during the playoff round a few weeks ago when we did the videos. And I was talking about, if USC loses or TCU, if they both lose, I gave the odds of that. And I had it 100% that TCU was out. And you said there's a chance that they're still in. So I moved it to about 1%. Obviously, I was way off on that because there was more than a 1% chance that they get in with a loss. And that's how it played out. It was a close loss like it had to be. We did discuss that it had to be a close competitive loss. I'm okay with TCU being in. I definitely was okay with them undefeated. No question. I don't think they deserve to be in here. And look, the point spread is the great equalizer, right? And it's telling you that. I mean, they opened Michigan 9.5 on a neutral field. So Michigan was over a touchdown dog at Ohio State a couple weeks ago. And I know they took care of business and outplayed them. But that just shows, once again, the difference in the point spreads here. Now Michigan really caught a break, by the way, playing TCU. Georgia and Ohio State have to eliminate each other in the semi-round. And, we do a preview video on that channel as well for that game, so check that out. This line has come down, though, from 9.5 quickly within the first couple days. It came down to 7.5. Not a big move. 8's somewhat of a dead number. 9 is a dead number. 7, though, is the key number. There's about a 4 to 5% chance that Michigan will win this game by exactly 7 points. It's the second most key number in sports betting after 3. 10 is up there as well. So, it was interesting. Open 9.5, never hit 10, but it's getting close to that other key number of 7. It's 7 or less. Definitely would have to say there's probably some value with Michigan. And keep in mind, you brought up a good point. We do a lot of the previews on the other team channels and the conference channels. Check those out for some of the December minor bowl games. This is the one December bowl game, this and the Georgia-Ohio State game, that are not minor bowl games, obviously. They're national semifinals, which means we can handicap it like a normal game. There's no doubt about focus. We don't have to worry about players sitting out. We don't have to worry about them partying too much or looking, to play around in the city that they're in instead of getting ready for the game. So it's a clean handicap. And Michigan has all the edges in this game. And one thing we see in games like this, and to be honest, the national semifinal games have not been great games over the last decade. There's usually like one that's a real stinker, usually a double-digit blowout. And I think everyone would agree if we had to pick one of the 4 teams that's going to most likely win by double digits, it would be Michigan. So we see the blowout factor in the Super Bowl back in the 80s and 90s when I started. We don't see it as much. Younger viewers might not remember how bad the Super Bowls were in the 80s and 90s, but it's called the big game factor in handicap, and it's a legitimate factor that you have to consider that when there's a mismatch, and this isn't a huge mismatch, but Michigan's the better team. Those teams, all things equal, focus spots normally pull ahead and win by margin. And the other reason it happens is because when a team is trailing, they get desperate. They have to take more chances, and that can snowball into turnovers, pick sixes, etc. So it's hard to play against Michigan in this spot. We'll see if it hits that key number of 7 or less. But the Michigan Wolverines, by the way, were a team, as you know, since September, I was saying, had a good chance of winning it all. I recommended them here on the channel, when they were 20-1 back in September after a few weeks. It was a little bit of a long shot. Let's look at the preseason odds. They were the 11th overall favorite when the season began in August, 50-1. There were over 40 teams ahead of TCU when the season began in August. They were 250-1. So no matter who wins this game, most likely Michigan, we're going to have either a 50-1 or 250-1 long shot playing for the national title. By the way, to put that in perspective, Alabama 2-1, Ohio State 3.5-1, Georgia 5-1, Clemson 11-1. Those were the 4 favorites when the season began. And USC, Oklahoma 22-1, Oklahoma 25-1. Notre Dame 40-1 was one spot ahead of Michigan, but they're no longer playing, of course. So yeah, we have a long shot either way in the national finals when all is said and done.
Always great insight from Steve Merrill. Catch him on wagertalk.com, wagertalk.com for not just college football, the NFL, the NBA, and college basketball. Catch us on Patreon, patreon.com. You get our Discord link. You talk college football all the time with the knuckleheads there. College football discussion nonstop. and Steve's under the radar selections, where he's 12-1-1 against the spread. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, we'll go to the Ohio State-Georgia game.
So 6.5, 61.5.
Unlike the other national semifinal, had you served up Ohio State and Georgia playing in a national semifinal in August, no one would have batted an eye. These were two of the expected best teams in college football. They arrive at this game a little bit different states. Ohio State limping in a 3-score loss against Michigan, still make their way into the playoff, and Georgia's been dominant for a long, long time. We got Steve Merrill on the line from WagerTalk.com. It's WagerTalk.com with Steve's money management system and all his selections on all the major sports right there at Wager Talk. Steve, this is a power matchup. Georgia, of course, playing better football recently. Ohio State trips up against Michigan, probably has separated this line to a certain extent, but Georgia's almost a touchdown favorite against the Buckeyes.
Yeah, when the season began, we talked about this back in September. There were 3 teams that were ahead and above everybody else, at least in the future odds. It was Alabama, actually, a 2-1 favorite back in August. Ohio State 3.5-1. Georgia was actually 5-1. Georgia was only the 3rd favorite when the season began. Clemson at 11-1 was the 4th team that was expected to be here. Everybody else, USC, Oklahoma 22-1, 25-1, Texas 33-1, Miami of Florida, Notre Dame 40-1 each, and then Michigan 50-1. They were 11th on that list. TCU was about 40th on the list, 250-1 when the season began. So, yeah, in hindsight, not a surprise that Ohio State and Georgia are here. And to be honest, I think Alabama should be here as well. I didn't think TCU necessarily deserved to get in after that loss. We talk a little bit more about that on the TCU Michigan previews, so check out that channel. Let's look at this game, though. On the surface, as a 6.5-point favorite, Georgia has a 71% chance to win straight up. Something I did not mention in the TCU Michigan preview is that as a 7.5-point current favorite, Michigan has a 74% chance of winning straight up. So there's almost a 50% chance we get Michigan, Georgia in the finals. 0.71 times 0.74, it's 40-some%. So that is the likely matchup. Ohio State's offense is what's going to have to get it done here. They're not going to win a low-scoring, grind-out game, in my opinion. Georgia holds a substantial defensive edge. It's interesting. We say they hold a substantial defensive edge, but then you look at the numbers. They give up a touchdown less per game, but they give up 4.8 yards per play. Ohio State gives up 4.9. But Georgia has faced a tougher slate of opposing offenses in the SEC that averaged 5.8. Ohio State's opponents have averaged just 5.4. So Georgia is the better defense, but it's not as extreme as you might think. What is fairly extreme is the pass defense. That's the difference in this game, in my opinion. Ohio State, for several years now, has been mediocre in the secondary. They gave up 6.8 yards per pass this year against teams that average 6.8. Georgia gave up 6.2, but their opponents averaged 7.4. They faced a lot of better passing opponents in the SEC. So that could be the difference in this game is pass defense. Offensively, Ohio State actually has the slightly better numbers, especially when you factor in opposing defenses. Ohio State actually faced tougher defenses in Georgia, yet they're 0.3 yards per play better, 7.3 versus 7.0. So we have the better offense in Ohio State, better defense in Georgia. This game might be more competitive than people think. We talked about the blowout factor and how the Michigan-TCU game has a little bit of that all over it because there's usually one of these two games that's not competitive. We almost have at least one team win by double digits every semifinal, it seems. It's hard to imagine Ohio State could beat Georgia by double digits. Maybe you could see Georgia doing it. They did it to Tennessee at home earlier this year. I did have a strong best bet on Georgia in that game for my clients. That was a home game, of course. Keep in mind, this game is in the Mercedes-Benz Dome in Atlanta. Not going to say Ohio State won't be packing the arena, but I do think you maybe give a point to Georgia. They're very familiar with this environment. They've played there almost basically every year. So we'll see how much that's worth. I think it's probably worth about a point in the power rating. And right now it's sitting below that key number of 7. Michigan's sitting 7.5. Georgia's sitting 6.5. There's about a 4 to 5% chance both teams win by exactly 7 points on average. So I think if you like Georgia, you probably want to go ahead and grab the 6.5 now before we get to New Year's Eve. If you like Ohio State, I would wait. There's some indicators that this line might hit 7 by kickoff. So it really depends on which side you're on when you play this game.
These teams are obviously going to be laser focused, as Steve and I have discussed, that always being a talking point concerning other bowl games, non-playoff games. But the confidence factor, though, you got to think Georgia's supremely confident, and I have my doubts about Ohio State after getting shell-shocked against Michigan, where they really stand in terms of their psyche. You would think with their talent that they would be confident, but I don't think they're quite where they need to be and have some work to do between now and getting ready to kick off against the Georgia team that's been the most dominant in college football. All right, Steve Merrill's works at wagertalk.com, folks. Get on over there. The money management system, in addition to all his selections on the NBA, college basketball, the NFL, and, of course, college football. And Steve's under-the-radar selection is a mere 12-1 against the spread. Where do you get that? Go to patreon.com, search Mark Rogers TV. Steve's kind enough to deliver his under-the-radar selection for us exclusively on Patreon. Search Mark Rogers TV. Steve, thank you so much for this.
Hey, thanks, Mark.
All right. Well, depending on how much time you've got.
Yeah, I got about 10 more minutes. So
Okay.
which other channels do you have?
All right. How about USC?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Tulane. What's the Cotton Bowl? Have on that one.
That one is seeing USC minus 1.5, 61.5.
Okay. USC misses a college football playoff appearance. The consolation is a trip to Dallas in the Cotton Bowl to take on Tulane, of course, the Group of 5 rep in the college football bowl landscape this season. We got Steve Merrill on the line from wagertalk.com. Get all of his selections on not just college football, but the NFL, college basketball, and the NBA right there at Wager Talk. Steve, we got a USC team that could have made the playoff, but they lost the Pac-12 championship game and really got blown out in the second half after a 2-touchdown lead. And now interesting matchup because, you've got a non-power brand there in Tulane, but they're coming off a big season. And, of course, the American Conference champion.
Yeah, this is such a great game, to talk about as far as how to handicap the bowls. I mean, if you look at this on the surface, if you didn't know anything else that was going on, you'd be like, how is USC only a 1.5-point neutral field favorite over Tulane? And the line only opened 2.5, by the way. I mean, this from the gate, the odds makers knew what to do with this game because Caleb Williams getting injured in that Utah game, and he still tried to play through it. And this is a situation where USC, all they had to do was win. They're in the playoffs for the national title. And now they're playing Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. They don't even get to the Rose Bowl because of that loss to Utah. I mean, everything crumbled on that Friday night. On the surface, though, USC did not deserve to be in the Final Four. This is a defense that on the season is now giving up 6.3 yards per play versus teams that average 6. Tulane averages 6.4 against opposing defenses allowed just 6. I mean, Tulane actually has the matchup edge offensively against USC. Tulane has a substantial defensive edge, to be honest. Now, I know they played a weaker schedule, about a touchdown weaker, by the way, on average, but they give up 4.8 yards per play, 20.5 points a game. USC, once again, 6.3 yards per play. So Tulane's given up over 1.5 yards less per play this season, and their offense is capable. So no question Tulane's going to be excited about this game, right? Cotton Bowl, first of all, right across the border there. I mean, it's a close game for them. Any bowl game, they would have been excited, but like a power game like this, to play USC, a team that was all basically one game away from being a playoff team. So the motivational aspect is off the chart. So what we do here is we just figure out, can Tulane compete? It looks weird. In fact, if I run my raw power ratings with everybody in the game, normal motivation, it'd be USC by about 7.5. So on a neutral field. So these teams are not as far apart as you might think. You would have thought it'd been 10, 14 points on average. So I understand this low line, and I understand why some money has come on Tulane. They opened at 2.5 under that key number of 3, obviously, because they knew it wasn't a good spot for USC and the early sharp money. And by the way, people betting this game on December 5th and 6th when it first came out, that's sharp money. That's not the public tying their money up for a January 2nd game. They didn't even wait for it to ever hit 3. They instantly took the 2.5s down to the +1.5, +1s even. So it does look like Tulane's the side here, even though there's probably no value anymore at this point. It's really hard to make a case for USC other than maybe being the more talented team. But then again, we have a month here till the game is played. We got to make sure who's even playing in this game.
Yeah, if you want to look at incentive for Tulane, just look at the football history of this school. It's been a long time since they played in a major bowl game. It's been decades. And they were a 2-10 team just last season. So USC and Tulane, we get the rundown from Steve Merrill on Wager Talk. WagerTalk.com is to check out Steve's complete lineup of his selections on all the major sports. And of course, join us on Patreon.com to get Steve's under the radar selection where he's 12-1 against the spread. Again, it's Patreon.com. Search Mark Rogers TV. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Mark.
And if we could squeeze in Clemson, Tennessee Orange Bowl.
Yeah, we do a couple more. That works.
Sure. No idea what the spread would be in this game.
It's Clemson minus 764.
Oh, that's right. Oh. All right. If you're into orange, well, you got Clemson, you got Tennessee, you got the Orange Bowl. A lot of orange there in Miami for a major bowl bid, with Clemson missing the college football playoff, did win the ACC and reclaim its crown there. Tennessee's been a surprise top 5 to 10 team for most of the year, missing its quarterback in Hendon Hooker here the last couple of weeks of the season. He will not play in the Orange Bowl against Clemson. Of course, we got Steve Merrill on the line from Wager Talk to size this one up, Steve.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the difference in this line. Obviously, it opened Clemson 4 with the uncertainty, and once it was, definitely certain, it's 6.5, 7 now. We have several weeks until this game is played, by the way, and it is mostly -7s out there, Clemson as a touchdown and extra point favorite, but I do see a few 6.5 still. So I think, Mark, if you like Tennessee, you probably grab the +7. If you like Clemson, I would definitely wait. I do think there'll be more 6.5s out there. You never know how the public's going to react. The public isn't playing these games early. They're not playing when the line came out on Monday, December 5th for a December 30th game. Once they all realize the quarterback's out, maybe that does bump it up to 7 or 7.5. But right now it looks like 6.5, 7 is going to be the range for this game. Two teams that obviously are probably disappointed to be in the Orange Bowl, to say the least. I mean, when the season began, there were 3 heavy favorites: Alabama, Ohio State, and then Georgia actually at 5-1. Alabama and Ohio State were like less 2, 3-1 each. But then Clemson was 11-1. They were the only team that wasn't 20-1 or higher. So they were expected to be that 4th team. Had a chance really late into the season. The South Carolina loss, just like it did the week before for Tennessee, eliminated both of these teams. So the South Carolina Gamecocks are the ones that knocked both these teams out of contention, because I do think they would have passed TCU had they held on and not lost that second game. Obviously, I think they get in over a 1-loss TCU team had they remained a 1-loss squad. So you do worry about motivation. Tennessee, obviously, they didn't miss much in that game against Vanderbilt. They win 56-0 as a 14-point road favorite. And, the backup quarterback has a lot of time to practice here, a full month. And we've often seen quarterbacks play extremely well in this situation. The key, I think, is to look at the Clemson pass defense. They were pretty good this year. 6.5 yards per pass allowed against teams that average 7.5. So I do think Tennessee will have a little bit of trouble moving the ball, maybe offensively, but it's just so much uncertainty here. And the total's barely moved. It opened 64.5. It's 64. So we've seen some movement on Clemson, obviously, up from 4 to 7, but very little movement on the total. And we'll have to, check some reports. We'll see how much Tennessee talks about the quarterback situation over the next few weeks, and if they sound positive and upbeat. Your guess is as good as mine, Mark. Which team is more excited to be here in the Orange Bowl, because they both had bigger picture on deck just a few weeks ago.
His name is Joe Milton, transfer from Michigan, has seen some playing time, and really they leaned on the run. He only threw 11 of 21 against Vandy, but he's been in some big spots and some meaningful games, but certainly not a Hendon Hooker production level. Clemson and Tennessee at the Orange Bowl. We get Steve Merrill from WagerTalk.com. Get on over to WagerTalk.com. Check out Steve's entire work there with the NFL, Major League Baseball. We're a few months away from that, but college basketball and the NBA as well. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks, Mark.
Sometimes it just comes out like,
that's right. We'll be doing baseball.
Autopilot, Well,
shoot, we'll be a month closer to baseball when that game's played on December 30th. What other team channels are? You got Iowa, Kentucky. You've got Purdue, LSU, Utah, Penn State. I don't know which channels are.
Texas,
Alabama, Kansas State, I guess. I don't know which channels are bigger.
I was going to say Texas, Washington.
That sounds good. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll be back on the week of the 26th there, so we can knock out some of the later ones. So that one's the 29th, so that's good to do. Okay. Washington, Texas. Let's see what we got. Texas -6, 68.5.
All right. The Pac-12 and the Big 12 get together as they always do with the Alamo Bowl. We've got Texas taking on Washington. We could call this maybe the Steve Sarkisian Bowl. His current and former employers getting together. Washington with a big season coming off 4-8. They change head coaches. Kalen DeBoer comes in and turns things around to 10-2, taking on an 8-4 Texas team. We got Steve Merrill here from Wager Talk to break it down. Steve, what do you have on the Longhorns and the Huskies?
Yeah, it really is amazing. All these bowl previews we've done, had we just blindly played against teams after getting their sixth win, like in November, we would have made a lot of money this year, Mark. And I mean, you didn't think like Texas was all that excited because they came bowl eligible. They beat Kansas State on November 5th, but then they lost to TCU outright as a 7-point favorite. That's how remarkable the TCU playoff appearance is, because not only did they lose last week and still get in, which I don't agree with, by the way, we've talked about that, but TCU was a touchdown dog to Texas, don't forget, just a few weeks ago, and Texas lost that game, but they did bounce back with solid wins against Kansas and Baylor the following two games, so they do finish a nice 8-4. You look at some raw power rating numbers, including mine, Texas is a top 10 team. They're one of the best teams in the nation, so if they show up, they should win this game by margin. But that's a big if. You do wonder about their motivation. I don't think coming into the season they necessarily thought they were going to be, a college football playoff team. In fact, if you look at the future odds, they weren't in the top 5 or 6. They were actually 33-1. They were like 7th on the board. So they obviously had potential, a lot more than Washington. I mean, Washington was nowhere in the top 20 or 30 even. They might have actually been ahead of TCU. I'd have to check. In fact, they're 300-1. TCU was 250-1. Washington was 300-1. So they were like top 50 when the season began. So this should be a mismatch, but as you know, with these minor bowl games, and this is a minor bowl game, especially for Texas, a team that had national title aspirations, you do worry about the focus. Now, it's the Alamo Bowl. It's in San Antonio, not that far from Austin. So they could have a little bit of an edge if their fans travel, but I think Washington's probably pretty excited to be playing this game. And Washington's a team that really turned it on down the stretch. Not only did they win every game in November, but they also covered their last 3, including that upset win at Oregon. 37-34 is a 12-point dog. Took care of Colorado, who's a terrible team. That could have been a letdown spot. Colorado was too bad to take advantage. And then a good win by Washington against Washington State, 51-33 in the Apple Cup there the day after Thanksgiving or the Saturday after. So they're playing better football right now than they were early in the season. Matchup-wise, both offenses are pretty good. Texas does hold a substantial defensive edge, though. We'll see if that's the difference. But these Alamo Bowls can get up in points because a lot of times you get, like today or tonight, this game, you have two high-profile teams that maybe had bigger pictures on deck. And that's why we've seen this total go from 65 up to 68.5. We've also seen the money come in on Texas early. The opening line was 3.5. Quickly, within a day or two, went to -6. I think the over move makes some sense, though, especially if these two teams aren't fully focused.
Join us on Discord. What you get there is my selections. You get, more importantly, Steve's under the radar selection, exclusive right there. That's the only place you can get it. Steve's 12-1. 12-1 against the spread on his under the radar selections. And you can join the Discord and talk college football 24/7, 365 with the knuckleheads there that we've got on Patreon. Go to patreon.com, search Mark Rogers TV. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
Thanks, Mark.
All right.
Do you have one more you want to do in early December, or we can knock them out in a
Sure. I don't know which one would come first. Let's see.
Which ones you looking at? I'll tell you.
Like LSU, Bama.
So that one's LSU's the second. So we got a lot of time. Bama's the 31st.
Notre Dame, South Carolina.
Notre Dame's the 30th. It looks like all the big ones you do normally. Yeah, I would say of those three, Notre Dame is the first. It's on the 30th.
Okay.
Let's knock that out, and we'll do the other ones, and I'll do it under the radar in a week or so.
Okay, that's the Gator Bowl, right?
Yes, that's the 30th. It's the Gator Bowl, and it's Notre Dame is a 3-point favorite, 52 against South Carolina.
Notre Dame this season is taking up an ACC bowl slot at the Gator Bowl minus the SEC and the giant killer, South Carolina. And so the Irish are a 3-point favorite in this one. We got Steve Merrill on the line from Wager Talk to help us break it down. As always, you can catch Steve's selections on wagertalk.com, and he gives us a slice of his college football looks across our landscape of channels here at the Voice of College Football. All right, Steve, we've got Notre Dame and South Carolina, a couple 8-4 teams getting together.
Yeah, I mean, South Carolina, what do they have left, right? They just knocked two teams out of the playoffs, and now they play in a bowl game. It's just an incredible run. And let's keep in mind, when the season began a year ago, the preseason Heisman favorite was Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma. He didn't even finish as their quarterback when the season was over. So there's always been some potential there at South Carolina. He had an incredible game against Tennessee, to say the least, in that 63-point win, 63-38 win. But then they did it again, 2-touchdown dog against Clemson the following week, did not take their foot off the gas. And keep in mind, right before those two big playoff eliminating wins for Tennessee and Clemson against those schools, they lost 38-6 against Florida the week before and barely beat Vanderbilt the week before that. So it is which South Carolina team shows up. I think there's no question they had some momentum. The debate becomes, does the full month off help or hurt them? Did they need a breather after those two wins? Probably. Did they need a full month off? Probably not. But then again, what do we do with Notre Dame? This is such a textbook example of the problems handicapping the college bowls, as transfer portal movement more than ever now in history of college football. And Notre Dame quarterback, didn't take long after they lost to USC. He's talking about it. So it's a difficult game to handicap. I do think South Carolina is a little bit more of a known quantity here. And on the surface, you look at Notre Dame, just 5.8 yards per play against teams that allowed 5.6, but they played a lot better down the stretch. In fact, they had scored 35 or more in 5 straight games until that USC game, and they only put up 27. They did have a 2-0 turnover deficit in that loss. Threw the ball well, did not run the ball well, though. And South Carolina on the season has had a bad run defense. They give up 5 yards per carry, almost 200 rushing yards per game. So with the quarterback uncertainty at Notre Dame, you do expect the Irish to run the ball more, and they should have some success doing that against South Carolina. They weren't a great run team this season, but that was South Carolina's big weakness, was the run defense. And even during this recent run of success, they gave up 237 to Clemson, 374 to Florida. Tennessee only ran for 152, and if you look back at it, maybe Tennessee should have tried to establish the run game more. They wouldn't have given up 63 points. So we'll see how this game plays out. As far as the line on this game, Notre Dame opened as a 5.5-point favorite. It's now down to 3. I even see some 2.5s out there. So if you like South Carolina, you probably want to grab the +3. If you like Notre Dame, I would wait, because especially when the public gets more involved with this near kickoff, it'll probably hit 2.5 or less. So it really depends on which side you like when you play this game. And keep in mind, 3 is the most key betting number in all of sports when it comes to football. About an 8 to 9% chance Notre Dame normally would win this game by exactly 3 points. So taking +3 or laying -2.5 is very critical when you play this game.
We've got tons of benefits for you on Patreon. Go to patreon.com, search Mark Rogers TV. You get Steve's under the radar selections. They're exclusive there on Patreon. 12, 1-1 against the spread. And you also can join our Discord, talk college football all the time with the knuckleheads right there. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Got a lot done there.
Good stuff.